All right, Clint from the doorway too, hanging out with JS from Estrangement. Thank you for doing this from the other side of the world. It's pretty nice to be able to do this with you tonight. So, uh, is it morning, afternoon? What time is it where you are?
It's approaching 10 a.m. in the morning.
So yes, half a day away and half a world away. Excellent, excellent. Uh, so I guess what I'm going to kind of do is say your record really kind of stood out to me. We kind of have a connection because we're both signed to the same record label. So uh, I did get you might really like this record, Clint. So you may want to check these guys out, kind of thing. So just so you know. But other than that, why don't you talk a little bit about the band and kind of how it came to be? I love the mix of kind of the neoclassic, the folky elements, and the doom death kind of all mixed together. That's what kind of drew me to you. But talk about the band, how it came to be, and kind of up to when you did the split about 8 years ago.
Yeah, okay. So I initially started writing music for Estrangement with sort of the vision that you've described in around 2010. And I just moved cities at the time. I didn't really have any kind of connection, so to speak, but I'd been playing in bands for years before that. And I thought, well, I want to get something going. What am I going to do? And Estrangement came out of that. And I just had to do everything myself in that particular time of life. And that was great. I still enjoyed that and learned a few things along the way. Then the Belong Beneath was a demo, was released in 2012, which was basically how long it took to collect enough instruments and record them and get them out. So the plan was always to use the demo to attract other musicians and say, hey, there's a band, here's some songs, do you want to play? So that worked quite well. And shortly after the demo came out, Char, who was an old friend of mine, joined on violin, and Uterpe joined on flute, who happened to live in the new area that I'd moved to. So we came together and we did the split. So at the time of recording the split, we considered doing an album then, but I still had really, for want of a better word, shitty recording equipment at that stage. And it sort of became evident halfway through the split song, Childlike Bewilderment, that, hey, this equipment isn't going to take much more than what we can do now. So we thought, okay, we'll do a split instead. And then we sort of put the feelers out there after we'd finished recording that song. And we were in touch with Weird Truth, who were a connection with us since the demo days, which was great. And they said, yeah, we love the song. We'd like to put it out. If you're looking for a split, just choose a band. And so I went through their catalog and I found Begrabness, who are an amazingly unusual band. And I thought, this is just the perfect fit. And so via email exchange, that all just fell together and the split was released. So that was great. And the split was good because it was the first time people thought, oh, this band's actually kind of serious. It's not just a demo tape. And yeah. So that was great. And so after that, we were about to start recording the album again. And then Mike from doommetal.com reached out to us and said, we're doing this My Dying Bride compilation CD. Would you be interested in doing it? And we thought, yeah, look, let's just do it. And it was good because when we put our songs together, there's lots of different layers and it takes some time. But with the My Dying Bride cover, I mean, we did that in one afternoon. So it was like, well, we get something out quite quickly. Yeah, so we were kind of tracking. I know when we said the band's been going since like 2012, 2010, it sounds like a long fucking time, but we were on track to putting something out every couple of years until we started recording the album. And this album is an example of sheer persistence, patience, and determination. We first started recording it just before the bushfires hit in Australia, which was a national emergency. Mm-hmm. To put that in perspective, all of my equipment had to be packed up and ready to evacuate at any time. We'd probably started maybe 2 or 3 minutes of 3 different songs into the album at that stage. And then everything had to stop. So luckily, the house didn't burn down. And then shortly after the bushfire stopped, it just rained for 3 weeks straight. And my little recording area flooded and all my equipment was damaged. So we had to repair that. And then we started resuming recording just after that. And then the first COVID lockdown hit. So then we had to stop again. And then that first lockdown period in Australia ended. So we started recording again. Then the second lockdown hit. And so this whole album was sort of spread out over almost 2.5 years of planning and recording, when our initial aim was to get it done in a couple of months. But you know, if you stick at something in life, you get through it. And we finally did that, and now it's out. And so, yeah, a real relief.
Nice, nice. So you kind of answered two of the questions I was going to ask in that summary, so that's even better now. So I can go to other things. But no, so I guess I kind of want to talk about the style on what disfigure mentality. It's probably three of the most unique kind of styles arranged together that work really well that you wouldn't think work, but they do. So when I talk about it again, I'm going to dig into a little bit deeper about it because I think the fans will want to kind of listen to you talk about this. I feel like there's folk music, but it's not folk in the traditional sense. There's Middle Eastern folk. There's Asian folk, in my opinion. Like there's almost sometimes throat singing. I kind of feel like in some of the way that you do stuff. And then there's that kind of, I know we're stereotyping, but that Peaceville 3 Death Doom kind of mid 90s to late 90s kind of Death Doom vibe. And then I'm going to say like there's an element of kind of like bands like Third of the Mortal that kind of come to mind with me too. Were you trying from that point in time? Because all I've heard is the split race you did on Weird Truth and the new record. But in the early days, were you trying to put those kind of all those styles together, or was it just kind of a straight Death Doom band and it got more influences?
Okay, it's a great question, by the way. So the plan was always to expand upon, I guess, what I've generally considered to be funeral doom.
Mm-hmm.
The demo was a lot rawer than the recordings that you mentioned, but there was always the idea that there would be like thrashing bursts of violence, because to me, as a funeral doom fan, the one thing I feel that genre really lacks is explosion. Like there's never, or not never, but the bands are quite happy to sit at these really long sort of calming tempos, and that's the appeal, the music, to many people. But for me, I always felt as though I want something to just come up and just smash you, when you listen to something. So when I formed Estrangement, it was going to be funeral doom with these explosive physical elements and a mixture of classical music. That was the initial vision. But at that stage, it was just me, you see. So that's a lot of vision for one performer, And so over time, I've collected these other musicians, with most recently Ligaminsa on double bass, and these other musicians have managed to really inject and help me develop that classical side, so that we can really give it authenticity, I suppose, is what we're driving for. So yeah, the vision still stapled in the 90s. I'm a 90s teenager, I suppose you'd say, and my own personal view is that the extreme metal creative just energy that poured out of the 90s has never really been replicated, and I feel very much though I'm anchored in that time. So these bands that you mentioned, they're not necessarily bands I've listened to in any way recently, but they're definitely bands that were of that creative wave that I'm very much inspired by. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and the other two bands that I was going to kind of throw in, and I don't know if you're a fan of or not, but being that we're kind of brothers of doom, I'm going to say you probably do like them. But you remind me a lot of the second and third DeLorean record that was on Wounded Love, and then I guess a fellow countrymate of yours, Mournful Congregation, is another band that kind of comes to mind on when you are more of that bombastic Death Doom kind of vibe. Are they influences? Are they things you like? Are they bands that you've not really listened to much?
They're both great bands that I know. They're not
Okay.
necessarily bands that I've listened to very closely in quite a while, actually. But yes, I know, especially Mournful Congregation, who I've met many times over the years in Australia. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
No, awesome. So I want to talk about the flute because it's one of the most interesting things on this record to me and kind of drew me. I never thought a flute could be dark and doomy the way it is, but it's still got kind of a light and airy quality. But you put the flute in very interesting places on the record where I feel like they may not fit the best, but they work the best. So when you were arranging this record and you were putting the more classical based elements to the record, did you have everything kind of structured out, or was it more, we're recording the record, let's see what fits?
Yeah, so one of the things, I guess it's a little bit of a side effect from when Estrangement was considered to be a solo project. It's not necessarily all up to me in that way. And I think because it started out that way, people assume that I'm the mastermind with these helpers. It's really not quite like that. Yes, I play the bulk of the instruments, but I don't tell the other musicians what to do or insist that they play, where they play. So Euterpe, the flautist, who is obviously a very talented musician, as you can hear on the record. When the album was finished, or when my parts were finished, I just sent it to her and said, hey, I'd really like you to play on these parts, but feel free to play wherever you want. And within a day or two, she just sent the whole thing back and all her parts were done. It was kind of unbelievable how quickly she worked compared to the rest of us. And that's just what she played. That's what she came up with. She has a folk background, a folk metal background herself. So some of those folk influences, she just took the music and just ran with it and did it. And I was curious as to what was going to come back because I was surprised at how quickly she managed to do the turnaround. And when she first sent back, the first thing I heard was the solo. She takes the first solo on the record in Detritivore, and the flute just comes in with that screaming shrill. And I heard it and thought, holy shit, this is perfect. So yeah, the flute is an unusual instrument. It's an instrument I have no personal experience with outside of Estrangement, but I feel really grateful to have it included because it adds a dimension that I couldn't conceptualize at all myself, really.
It works so well with kind of the overall theme of the record. So that's cool. I guess the next thing I kind of want to talk about is vocals. And a lot of bands have one or two vocal styles. I mean, dude, you have like 27 goddamn vocal styles going on this. And when I legitimately tell people who haven't listened to the record before, if you've never heard Tibetan throat singing, you're going to hear it for the first time. Maybe in a professional manner, but it's very close to what that is. And I said, you are literally going to hear folk singing. You're going to hear aggressive death metal singing. You are going to hear clean kind of gothic metal vocals. Like, you're going to hear a lot of different things. I mean, you're going to hear kind of, even to me, like post-metal kind of vibes at times, the way you do vocals. It reminds me a lot of Cult of Luna and stuff like that, like, and just the way they present their vocals. Was it hard to kind of know where to guide the vocals on this record? Because there's not one song that has like a vocal structure of like this part, this part, this part, this part.
Firstly, thank you. That's great. So my background before Estrangement was an extreme metal drummer and extreme metal vocalist, right? So that was kind of what I did the most in other Australian underground extreme metal bands. And when I first started Estrangement, I thought I'm going to make the vocals really minimal and just concentrate on the music. And on the demo, the vocals are quite sparing. There's not a lot of vocals at all. And then over time, as I've sort of decided, I want to include everything that I can do in Estrangement, I've just built up the vocals bit by bit. And then with Disfiguramentality, it was an opportunity to just include as much as I could. So I just like to experiment with my voice, really. I have no singing training background whatsoever other than just screaming in extreme metal bands. And I thought, well, what can I do to make the vocals more varied? Because obviously if you just scream all the time, it's just the one thing. And so I've just chosen to research little skills here and there along the way, and they just seem to work. And so the decision to include the voice in as many different capacities as possible is actually kind of similar to how we approach any of the other instruments. We've got sort of like with the violin shrieks and the clunky sounds of the different instruments and the like. We just treat the voice like any other instrument, and how much variation and diversity and how creative can we be with this instrument, and that was the result.
Cool. So I guess the last thing musically I'm going to talk about is the jazzy element to this. And I know a lot of people aren't going to hear it, but I'm a fucking music nerd and I like really dig in and listen and try and hear arrangements of pieces. But you have a very kind of, dude, if this isn't praise, then I'm sorry. I don't like a very Wedge Blend Ende or like Octorus kind of vibe to it, where like I don't think they know jazz worth shit, but they play it really goddamn interesting, and you do it the same way. I don't think you're a jazz band in any way, shape, or form, but the jazzy elements and layers feel like they are very intentional.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You've probably got a bit of an interest in jazz yourself, really, by the way that you're explaining that. So one of the things that I've always really liked about music in general is its mood, the mood of music, and what puts, I guess, 99% of metalheads off jazz is that when they think of jazz, they think of upbeat 50s music with people clicking their heels and dancing. But there's pretty much any reputable or fantastic or even average jazz musician will always have these pieces that are edging on the dark side and have these moody kind of disturbing or beautiful compositions, and I'm a fan of that side of jazz, and I always try to seek out different jazz musicians and bands that do that. And so the elements that we take from jazz are the ones that I feel are the most, I guess, hypnotic from the jazz canon. So I am a fan of jazz, but I'm a fan of very particular types of compositions in jazz, and they definitely creep their way into the music, and everyone in the band has got some kind of like affinity with jazz too. So it's not just me. There's all these little subtle jazz injections in there as well.
Yeah, because I was going to say that the jazz stuff that I hear, and now that I know that you're interested in it too, we'll probably have a kinship and a bond here too.
Yeah,
I feel like there's a lot of John Zorn. I feel like there's a lot of Coltrane. I feel like there's a lot of Sun Ra. I don't know if you like Sun Ra, but like you remind me, like, because Sun Ra is the closest thing to metal that jazz has ever had in my life, like where John Zorn is the closest thing to like noise rock that jazz has ever had. I feel like Sun Ra, like if he had distorted guitars, he would be a goddamn death metal band. Like that whole project would be death metal. So like that's what I hear in what you do, and that's why I think maybe it drew me in a, that jazzy kind of way as well too.
Yeah. Look, and on Pat Metheny's first album, Bright Size Life, there's a couple of really moody little guitar solos that he plays, and obviously with Jarko playing bass, a lot of sort of feeling in that. And Jarko's my favorite Jarko piece, Portrait of Tracy, from his album, just these ethereal, beautiful kind of soundscapes that don't really belong anywhere other than jazz and extreme metal, really. But yeah, that's the side of jazz that I'm inspired by, definitely.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So there's two songs in particular on this record that I want to talk to you about and kind of get feedback and thought on it. It may not be your favorite songs, but it's the two songs that drew me to talking to you today. First one's Fire Voice. And the reason why I want to talk about that one is that, to me, if there was one song that I would play somebody for the very first time and say, here's Estrangement. If you like this, we're going to move further. If you don't like this, fuck it, we're not going to listen to anything else because there's no purpose to go. And the reason why is because you mix the doom, the folk, the neoclassic all at the same time in that record, like on that song, in the most interesting of ways, where it kind of is the most well-rounded track in my eyes for somebody new to listen to you.
Fantastic. Yeah, great. That's definitely praise too, so thanks. So the inspiration behind that was I became interested in throat singing a number of years ago, and I just wanted to work out what I could do with it in the context of metal. And the whole song was just written around that one chant that it begins with, which I recorded without any accompaniment or metronome. I just hit record and just did it in a dark room, and then just built everything over that chant. So I started with something that I guess I was kind of unfamiliar with and was just experimenting with, and then I brought in all the other things that I know into it as well. And one of the reasons why that folky part sounds so great is because your terpe comes in with the with almost like the Irish tin whistle, I think it is, and it's like it becomes a march. So you've got this march through Asia and then into sort of Celtic lands, and it all just blends together. And the uniting feature is the metal. So that was sort of the lyrics of that song, actually, they're also about the bushfires, about getting ready to flee, and the voice is ultimately this approaching fire, and the music is, well, what the fuck are we going to do if the fire comes? Yeah.
Cool. No, thank you, man. So the next song we're going to talk about is Doppelganger. And the reason why I want to talk about that is the one that fooled me into believing that you were a doom metal band until you decided that you wanted to be a full-on fucking black metal band. All right. And like the last part of that goddamn song is maybe one of the most epic, dirty, ugly black metal tones I have ever heard on a doom metal record in my life. So talk to me kind of about that song, and how the hell did that happen when the beginning of the song is nothing like the end of the song?
So Doppelganger is actually almost like a summary of everything Estrangement's done. So on the first demo, there's some similar explosions into just blast beats out of nowhere, and so this was sort of harking back to sort of capture everything that we've tried to achieve with Estrangement. It's also the longest song on the album, and it really goes through. So some of the songs are structured almost like a journey that has very particular moments and significant events that occur throughout that journey. And Doppelganger reaches a very particular climax at that point, lyrically as well. And so when we were constructing the song and this climax happens in the theme, what are we going to do? How are we going to emphasize this? And we came up with just a very violent piece of music to round out what had been a very drawn out and painful journey already. Mm-hmm. So Doppelganger pretty much took on its own life based around that journey. Yeah, and as I mentioned before, one of the things that I have really tried to include with Estrangement is this touch of violence in it, you know, and that Doppelganger definitely achieves that. It goes from a serene, almost peaceful, you know, doom kind of landscape, and then bang, it hits you.
Absolutely. So why did you not stick with Weird Truth, and how was your journey to work with Stu at Aesthetic Death?
Weird Truth were fantastic. They were really proactive with the split. The reason why I went with Aesthetic Death was actually at the time of the split, I'd approached Aesthetic Death and Weird Truth, and Weird Truth came back with an idea straight away and suggested one of their bands for the split. And so Stu and I agreed pretty much at that time, okay, we'll collaborate in future, but I'm going to go with Weird Truth for this one because they've got the band, they're ready to go, let's do it. And he said, yep, that's fine. And then 10 years later, the album's done and off we go. Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
I've basically been in touch with Aesthetic Death since the same time as Weird Truth.
That's awesome.
2012, yeah.
Nice. So yeah, so I'll give you a little heads up on how Stu and I got together, and I'm now going to put my 4th record out with them. Literally, I had sent 2 of my doom metal bands that I've been with for years. He loved them, but we could never see eye to eye on a time frame to release it because he was so backed up with bands. And then just for shits and giggle, I did a band called Black Waves, and he was like, I sent it to him just as a whim because it was like a harsh noise record, and he was like, I'll put that out for you. And I'm like, what do you mean you put it out for me? You and I have been talking for 7 years. We've never been able to correlate anything. He's like, yeah, I got time. I got availability. Let's do it. I was like, awesome. And then like I sent him a few other things over the 5 years between that record and when I did a split with him with a band called Cadaver, and like we never talked about putting music out. And then all of a sudden he goes, hey, you want to do anything else with me ever again? And I was like, well, I was just waiting for you to ask. And like, yeah, but it took 5 years to get there. And then, yeah, we started making music again. And I agree. Stu works in a very cool, slow, methodic way, but he's one of the best human beings I've ever talked to in my life. And literally our second Slumbering record, I handed it to him and he goes, I can't release it until probably 2023. And I was like, okay, no problem. So I got it to another record label called Trepanation. And now, ironically, Trepanation's putting out the cassette of our new record and Stu's putting out the CD. So I think like, just like you, it's right time, right place, good people. We all kind of gel at the right time. And it just took you 7-8 years to put out a great full length. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah. And look, if we hadn't been so fraught with all the delays we experienced, maybe the album wouldn't have made it anyway. So yeah, right. The timing was great. Stu's been fantastic to work with. He's really supportive, knowledgeable. Yeah, I've got no complaints about him at all. It's been fantastic working with him.
Nice. Now that the record's out, have you gotten any kind of press or feedback that either intrigued you or confused you in a review, or somebody saying something like something you would never thought about the record if this wasn't said in press?
Not yet, actually. The reception's been overwhelmingly positive so far, and I'm aware that will have to change because not everybody's going to like it. But so far, the only reviews have come through, they've been just glowing. Really, I've tried to distribute a few of them to people and say, "Hey, look what people are saying about this fucking album." You know, it's been a real trip. But I'm looking forward to more confusing and perhaps even some negative critique of the album. It will have to be out there at some stage, but no, only the good stuff's come through so far, which has been a good experience. But at the same time, I've always enjoyed albums that have mixed reviews, because if someone hates something, you want to know why. You know, what is it about this that you really don't like? And that will happen in time. But no, so far everything's just been, we love this, and that's lovely. Thank you very much. But,
Awesome.
but yeah, it's been good.
Cool. So if I was to say somebody picks up your record for the very first time, has never heard the band ever before, how would you describe it to them right before they listen to it?
Well, that's happened a few times now, because, you know, I'm friends with normal people who are, oh, you're in a band, you know, what do you play? And so they get a copy of the CD. I generally say, look, it's got a lot of screaming, but it's sort of epic heavy metal that has a number of unusual influences you wouldn't expect. And I kind of just leave it at that and let them make of it what they will.
Nice.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the artwork. How does the artwork portray a story to what's on the record in the band's eyes?
Yeah, so the artwork was done by Anton Pulverenti, who's a friend of mine, and I guess he's sort of an artistic member in a community of people that are interested in extreme things. He's an overwhelmingly talented artist. You could look him up. He's renowned around the world. He does amazing 3D chalk artwork and all these other things. And when I realized how talented he was, I was like, you know, he likes heavy metal as well. I said, look, would you like to do some artwork for my album? He said, yes, of course. And so we had a bit of a discussion about concepts, and he had this idea of the centaur. He quite enjoys that kind of imagery. And I sort of said to him, look, I want it to look like something that's sort of archaic and otherworldly. And he said, yep, okay. Sent me a couple of sketches. What do you think? And then bang, he came up with that. I think he did the whole thing with one piece of charcoal or graphite or something like that. I've actually got the hard copy here. It's, you know, I don't know, it's the size of a huge, like a television kind of thing. It's quite a large artwork. And yeah, so it all came about from there. And then I sent him the lyrics, and throughout the booklet, there's a few other sketches, and he just did about 4 or 5 sketches based on his own interpretation of the lyrics, and they're included in the lyric sheet on the physical copy of the CD as well. But yeah, I was really pleased to work with him. There was never any doubt it wasn't going to be amazing with a guy that high profile. But yeah, thanks, Anton.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. That's why I was asking. I know Aesthetic Death put it out on CD. Any thoughts of a vinyl release?
I'd love to do a vinyl. Yeah, that would be fantastic. If anyone's interested in releasing it on vinyl, reach out. Yeah, I've always thought vinyl is sort of the ultimate way to do it, and the artwork would look great. At the time that we were releasing this album, CD was the only thing that was available at that particular time. There was a huge vinyl backlog, and I think it was taking several years or something insane to get vinyl sorted. So that just fell by the by, and we stuck with CD. But yeah, always open to vinyl, definitely.
Yeah, there was a 16-month delay at one time, so I totally understand.
That must have been right at the time we finished the album too, because it was like, we're not going to wait another 16 months to get this out. Like, this has already taken 15 years, you know.
Yeah, but, very cool. So Doom in general, just as far as a musical art form, it's kind of, I hate to say it, but like a forgotten art form a lot. Like, it has moments, like the late 90s had a great moment. The like 2010s had a great moment. And I feel like it's starting to have a new moment, but maybe more in kind of like a sludgier, crustier kind of way than it used to be. How do you think Doom connects to the metal listener different than like black metal or death metal or thrash?
Yeah, this is the part that always, you know, because there's always something about something about something you love that you don't like, right? And this is where like my relationship with metal becomes sort of frayed, because there was this huge creative boom in the 90s, as we were talking about before, and that was death, doom, and black metal, and they all just pushed out these amazing things simultaneously. It was like a revolution. And then each one of those genres then flirted with kind of a commercial success / mainstream, and they all sort of pivoted and reduced their extremity in different ways. Doom metal went down the gothic pop route, which is music that personally I can't enjoy at all. And so Doom sort of lost its soul in a very specific way. Black and death metal became melodic death metal, the commercial IKEA metal, I think they call it for a while, with catchy melodies, and all of a sudden the lyrics weren't satanic anymore and they're about feelings. And so death metal did its own thing, but still kind of had some kind of connection to death metal. And then black metal became a parody, and now black metal is almost comedic in many instances. And the bands are happy to be comedians, and that's their prerogative. That's fine. But I think all the genres were affected in different ways. But Doom specifically moved a little further from metal, and I think that's why we have the crisis in Doom that we have today, because it's only really the diehards that were around at that early time in the 90s that still appreciate Doom, that I know anyway. Whereas you'll always see, you know, a 17-year-old pimply faced kid in a Cannibal Corpse shirt or a Cradle of Filth shirt. That's still going on, but you don't really see a Skepticism shirt down the road, or a Paradise Lost shirt anymore, unless there's someone's in their 40s or 50s, right? So I just think that Doom just disconnected in a way that metalheads just couldn't enjoy anymore. Whereas the other genres, when they sold out, they still managed to maintain a metal kind of fan base. That's my own opinion.
That's fair. Yeah. This 50-year-old right here is very proud of his Thurgathon and Skepticism shirt. So I appreciate that very much. So I guess the next thing I'm going to kind of ask is, where is Estrangement heading? Like, now that we have a full-length record out, please don't wait another 9-10 damn years to put something out. But like I said, what direction are you heading? Or is it going to be similar to what you're making now, or is it very different? Is it done? Like, you talk to me. Like,
okay, so there's so it's not done. So I won't sort of say that there's an album coming out, you know, next week, or that's not happened yet. The good thing about all the different delays that we had throughout the recording process, while it was frustrating at the time, was that sure, we might not be able to have people around to physically record music, but we can all still write music independently of each other. So we still have a lot of music that we can use towards an album. There was even some instruments I bought to use on Disfiguramentality, but because we ran out of time in terms of an hour of music, they weren't included. So I've still got some instruments that haven't been used in Estrangement yet. So number one, we'll be using those instruments on the next recording. The other thing too is that there was actually initially going to be a lot more classical and flamenco guitar on Disfiguramentality, and I bought a new guitar just before we started recording that album. But again, the other interesting side effect of things taking forever is that all of a sudden we just finished the album, because it was delayed and stopping and starting all this time. All of a sudden we just listened to it back and said, oh shit, we've got an hour of music, it's time to stop. But there was actually a lot of other things that we were looking to include that really didn't get as much attention as they did. So the next recording may be an EP, maybe an album. We'll see kind of where we're at when we want to sit down and actually do it, and what's going on in everybody's personal lives. But there's still a lot of acoustic music, sort of flamenco type music and Middle Eastern style music that we're going to make sort of heavy, similar to this concept of Fire Voice, really, where it starts out in what feels like a certain part of the world and then sort of moves into another kind of area. So that's how we're going to begin the next recording.
Cool. So let's talk about Australia for a moment, because to me, particularly, Doom never died there. It flourished and grew, and is continuing to grow with newer bands even now still. But I mean, we can go all the way back to, like, you know, Disembowelment and things like that, like, you know, 25, 30 years ago. And I mean, now they have a new band, and it's not that much different than Disembowelment. Like, it's almost kind of, you know, the same there. But, you know, you got your mournful congregations. You also have bands like Halo, which kind of mixed industrial and doom together. Why do you think that style of music is so popular where you're from?
I don't feel as though it is popular, actually.
Really?
I don't feel as though there are a lot of people around here that are really into doom. Perhaps these bands are popular overseas, but they're not necessarily household names in Australia. Disembowelment, I'll just comment on Disembowelment. I still remember hearing Disembowelment for the first time as a teenager, and it ripped my fucking head off. I couldn't believe it. And of all the bands you mentioned, that's probably the one that I have the strongest affinity with. I think also too, Australians are quite isolated from the rest of the world. So when we do things and when we get interested or involved in something, we don't necessarily have a large community to bounce these ideas around with. And so you end up with sort of small clusters of people releasing music that isn't quite as, I guess, ingrained in a specific culture or movement. And I think by default, some of the bands here can be a little unique via that. contrast that to, say, Norwegian black metal, where every second teenager was in a black metal band, and you end up with huge pools of bands that sound very similar. But it's not quite like that here. For example, the guys in Montfort Congregation are about a 16-hour drive from where I live. So, I mean, even if I wanted to sort of bounce ideas around off of it, it's not going to happen, you know.
Right.
Like, so I think, yeah, by default, Australia, just through isolation, develops little unique nuances that that can both restrict or at times really propel bands forward.
Nice. Is this something that you want to do live, or is this always going to be a studio project?
I would love to play live. Like, I'm one of those people that believes that the true power of music is in live performance. It's just a question of whether or not it's feasible and how we'd go about doing it. We're definitely open to the idea of doing it, but the amount of effort it would involve to pull it off would be roughly the same amount of effort it would be to do another album. So if it's sort of like around those two effort baskets, I'd probably lean towards getting more music out there first. But we're definitely open to the idea of playing live. It would just mean we'd either have to A, expand the band lineup to include a few more musicians, or B, we can alter the songs and the music so that they can be performed with the musicians that we have currently. I think before making that decision, I'm more leaning towards recording more music though, because there's still so much music we have that we've written over the past couple of years that we'd like to get out there.
Cool. So as far as, have you ever had any interest in collaborating with another project at all, or like kind of putting the minds of two artists together? And if so, is there anybody in particular you'd like to work with to be able to kind of co-work on, you know, a song or a record together?
Actually, I've done a few collaborations. So I did the drums for the latest Aphonic Threnody release. And I played, I think, 4 guitar solos on that album as well. That was great. That was a miracle of technology. So I think Rick's based in the UK, and he initially asked me to play cello on what was his new album at the time. And I sort of said to him, look, I play cello in Estrangement, and I'm actually quite limited on the cello, and I wouldn't be able to play for you in a way that didn't sound like my own band. So I'm happy to still collaborate with you, but I don't think I'd be the right cellist for your outfit. And he just said, okay, what about drums? And sure, so bang. So we did that, and that album goes for like 2.5 hours. So that was like I tell you what, playing 2.5 hours at 20 beats per minute on the drums that was challenging, right? That was challenging, but very rewarding. And that album came out, which is good. I think that's kind of all I've done collaboratively, except for when we did the Might Own Bride cover. I ended up collaborating with a couple of other musicians, Dominic Saunders and the fellow Steen from Until Death Overtakes Me. So that was a good little project as well. I like the idea of collaborating here and there. It's a good kind of thing, but I more do it as a break from being saturated in my own stuff. I don't necessarily seek out to actively collaborate with other people, but always open to it.
Cool. So another question kind of in that direction, kind of flipping it. Let's say you could have somebody rework one of your songs. What band would you want to do that, and who would it be interesting for it to be done by?
Wow. All right. He's not alive anymore, but one of my favorite composers is Lepo Simera. He was an Estonian composer, and I still remember hearing his 6th symphony for the first time. This would have been, it probably would have been 20 years ago. And it's just one of those pieces of music that's so utterly chaotic and so terrifying that you can't do anything but concentrate on it. The second you start hearing it, it's like absolutely mind-blowing. I'd send the album to him and get him to return to life and see what he thinks of it. Yeah, that would be great.
That's cool. No, that's awesome. Is there anything musically, and I'm not talking about like rap or anything like that, but is there anything musically that you would not put in Estrangement?
Definitely. So one of the things about, I guess, the approach we have to Estrangement, it's just about finding the right mood and feel at the right point in the song. So from that, when that becomes your perspective, the actual genre itself begins to break down, and you're actually just following a certain mood. And it's, if this mood is going to be gentle, okay, well then perhaps an acoustic instrument would be better. If this is going to be harsh, well then we'll have screaming. And I just sort of follow my own sort of, I guess, emotional instinct through a song and choose the influences as we go. So as long as the music fits the mood that I'm trying to achieve at the time, the genre itself is irrelevant. I can't ever see rap music fitting the mood of Funeral Doom, but look, you never know. But I just try to follow the mood, and if the mood takes me to something that sounds jazzy or something that sounds like classical music or Middle Eastern music or Oriental music or whatever, then I'll just follow it and just do the best with what I've got.
Cool. After the record's been done now for a while and you've had some time to digest it and you've had some time, I don't know if you're like me, but like I have to listen to my record like 7, 8, 10 times to make sure I'm confident enough to send it to the label to make sure it's like what I really want them to have. Is there anything that you would change, or are you happy with the way it is? Is there something that now, after having it out for a bit, that you're like, oh, wow, that's not what I really thought it was going to be, but now I listen to it 3 or 4 or 5, 10 times and I hear something completely different from it?
There's nothing I'd change that I can hear, but I would change the way I recorded it. Okay. Because this was my first attempt at an album. I have no IT or audio engineering experience whatsoever. So this was like, and initially we were looking at having someone else mix the album, and they said, oh, make sure you've got all your guitar tracks like this and blah 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 blah. And that was nothing like that. I mean, I might have a guitar track for track 1 and then the next guitar track might be track 10. Everything was just in different parts, and that made getting the last few things done very complex. So the thing I'd probably change, and I hope to change going next time, is just finding a bit more of a logical way to do the mechanics of the recording, because as a newcomer, that was a lot of work. And one of the things about Disfiguramentality that's sort of conflicting for me is that, yes, I play 8 different instruments and do all these vocals on the album, but I've also been the one setting up that microphone to record every single fucking track you hear, and the actual amount of engineering and all that computer clicky stuff that outweighs the amount of time I play on the album, like 100 to 1. And so I'd really like to find a way not to do that in the future, because all the other bands I've played in, we've gone to studios before, so I just play my part and I'm done in a couple of hours. Not with Estrangement, no way.
I feel it, man. When I do the slumbering, it's the same way. It's all me, all by myself in a room, maddening. You spend 50 hours recording and mixing it, and then 3 hours playing it. I totally get it. So I've done the exact same thing. I have a partner that I do all the other music with, and he records it, because I cannot. I was like, you need to do that madness, because if I have to do it again, we're never going to play music again. I can't be in 5 bands and do that. So
I'm envious when I speak to other musicians, like, oh, we're going to go record an EP this weekend. I'm like, oh, great. Okay, you'll have this done. Someone will do all that for you, and you'll have a finished product in a week. I'll be here every second weekend for the next 6 months, just making sure it sounds okay,
Right.
But look, it has its advantages as well. I mean, you can slot it in around your life. You can do it as many times as you need to, if you want to do that. While there's a lot of effort that goes into those behind the scenes things, there's definitely advantages as well. I don't mean to rubbish all those people that put all this effort into things at home, but it's hard work.
Yeah. And then I don't know, did you have Greg from Esoteric master it for Aesthetic Death as well too, or did you have somebody else do it?
No, I had a friend actually master it for me here. I've got a couple of friends with superpowers, I suppose you could say. Greg was available to master it and mix it, but we decided to do it locally because a good friend of mine who plays in a black metal band at the moment called Curvner, he runs Last Gasp, I think, recordings, it's called. Nice. And he does mixing and mastering services there, and I've known him for over 20 years, so he was immediately available, and we did it, and he did a fantastic job on that too, which is good.
Nice. Yeah, if you ever get to work with Greg, he's a mad genius, just so you know. Like, he is. Well, he made my shit sound amazing. That's all I'm gonna say.
Well, it's funny. Well, when we were first talking about recording the album, I was sort of speaking with Stu from Aesthetic Death, and he brought Greg into the conversation. And Greg was saying, "Now make sure you do record like this. You record like that." And he gave me like this list to work through. I started out like that, and like I think the first perhaps 30 minutes of recording, I was following this roadmap, and then I thought, I just don't have the expertise to pull this off. I'm just going to have to improvise it and do it my own way. So I've used some of Greg's sort of recording ideas, and the rest I've just thought, Yeah, look, he's obviously very talented and very good at what he does, but I would need a significant training process that spans several months to years to be able to do what he does in the studio. I think he's really.
And those are just suggestions. Trust me. He's
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he's like one of the most easygoing guys. Because literally at the end of it, when I recorded it and sent it to him, he goes, "I totally know what you want. I need you to do one thing, man. You need to bring it down about 4 dBs." And I was like, "No problem. I can do that." So I did that, gave it to him, and he's like, "Perfect. Now there's a noise floor and I can mix and master this thing." That's what he said to me. So trust me, I totally get where you're going. On that kind of section of talking, as far as the mixing and the mastering of the record, do you feel that that's a crucially important part of this style of music, or do you think that when it stays more raw and more to the heart, that it becomes a better record for extreme music in general?
Yeah, I think there's definitely. I think both. There's something going on. I think each kind of recording takes on its own life and has its own kind of aesthetic. And there are some recordings that just sound perfect when they're completely raw. But there's also completely raw recordings that also sound like shit, you know.
Yeah.
And the one thing I like the least though is the overproduced sound where everything sounds sort of pretty and clean. I think that I just don't think any music should sound that way. And the least of all is extreme metal. But I don't think any music should sound like it's something that a machine created or polished. You know, you just want blood and guts. You know, if you want and music's been live for centuries. You know, the capacity to record music is such a recent phenomenon in the history of human music. So I think we take that, we make a fetish of that, and we do all these things that you couldn't have done. You know, even 50, 60 years ago, let alone 200 years ago. So I often feel that, yeah, if you're going to record something, you can choose however you want, but just don't overproduce it.
Right.
Keep it human. Yeah.
Cool. So what I'm going to do is kind of wrap it up here and give you like the floor to kind of talk about Estrangement, what you're doing, what's going on. If you have any other new projects you want to talk about, let the people here that are going to watch it, as I joke, the 50s and hundreds of people that are going to watch this interview with you and I, tell us what you're doing for the next 6 months to a year.
Yeah, cool. Well, we just released a film clip a couple of days ago for the track Clusters from the album. It's actually more of a sort of a short silent film, just set to the classical music piece from that album. So that's been a good thing to release because it's a bit different and it's the newest thing we've got out at the moment. So if anybody wants to check that out, please do so. It was a lot of a lot of passion went into it, let's say. But the next step for us is to consider what our next recording will be, whether it'll be an EP or an album. We're sort of in two minds for that. But it's also December now, it's Christmas time, everything's going to start shutting down. That's a decision that we probably won't make until early next year. But there'll be more music for us to come, definitely. The music's ready to go and we're just keen to get it out. And I just want to say thanks to yourself, Clint, and to the early birds that have sort of jumped on this album and had put a bit of energy into listening to it and sending little reviews and things around the world. That's been amazing. I mean, the releases we've had previously have got a bit of attention, and a few people have reached out and said, "Hey, I think this is interesting," but this has been a complete other level. This is sort of this is by far, it's only been out a week, and this is by far the most amount of attention we've had since 2012. So yeah, thanks to everyone for contributing to that. Yeah.
Nah, cool, man. Again, JS, it's been a blast. Thanks for talking to me and going over this and letting the world know more about Estrangement and what you're doing. And again, Clint from the Doorway too, hanging out with JS. Until next time, man, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Cheers, man.